What's going on, Tamers? It's me, the Digi-Police Chief East, and I'm finally doing my deck profile for the D-Brigade / Digi-Police deck that came out in BT14's Blast Ace. Now, I know this video is a little overdue. I could have honestly put this deck profile out on like the first day of the set's release, but honestly, that's not the kind of deck profiles I want to do. I don't want to be the kind of guy who puts out deck profiles that are really generic, where just all the cards that thematically fit together are put together in a pile of cards, or like, you know, make deck profiles that are rushed or hastily done. For example, like too many or too little cards, things like that. I want to make sure that the deck profiles that I put out are high quality and ones that I can fully stand behind. That means actually playing with the deck, putting the cards together, seeing what works, making some changes, and over again, just, you know, folding steel over steel to make sure I get the sharpest sword as possible at the end of it. Well, enough dawdling. Let's take a look at the actual deck profile and some combos and strategies for the Digi-Police / D-Brigade deck for BT14's Blast Ace. So as always, let's start with our level 2s, our Digi-Eggs for the deck, and this deck is going to run 4 copies of the BT14 Missimon. Now, this card's effect doesn't seem that spectacular on paper, but when you combine it with the deck's full strategy, it's actually very powerful and basically lets you predict the future. By sending 3 Digi-Police or D-Brigade cards back from your trash to the top of your deck, the Digimon gains 2000 for the turn. Now, honestly, we don't really care much about the plus 2000 DP. To be really frank here, D-Brigade / Digi-Police cards are not long for this world, and that's why they always need new recruits. What you really want is the ability to stack the deck, because that's going to pay off in spades later on. So hopping up to our level 3s, the first one we're going to take a look at is going to be 4 copies of the BT4 Commandramon. If you've played D-Brigade before in the past, you know this card is indispensable. When destroyed, it allows you to basically replace itself by looking at the top 3 cards of your deck and playing a Commandramon from those cards among them. Now this means you can attack opponent's security without any tempo loss and keeping your board. And because BT14 adds more copies or more cards with the Commandramon name, this guy only becomes more useful. Our next level 3 is going to be 4 copies of the super rare BT14 Commandramon. This guy, look at top 5 cards, grab 1 D-Brigade or Digi-Police card from among them, put it to your hand, and the rest you can put in any order either on the top or the bottom of the deck. I cannot overstate how good this effect is. You can predict your next couple of turns, or you can toss some useless cards to the bottom of the deck depending on the situation. And because the search effect is an on-play effect, the Commandramon we just talked about can be destroyed. You can look up this guy on the top of the deck, play him, then immediately look at your next 5 cards, grab something in hand, and then predict the next few turns. In Inheritance, he has the power to save the Digimon by destroying one of your D-Brigade cards whenever he would be removed from the field for any reason. This kind of protection is good for anything from being destroyed by battle, to send back to the hand or the deck, even sent to security. The only thing this effect can't stop is DP- and De-Digivolution. Next up, we're going to have 2 copies of, you guessed it, another Commandramon. This one being the BT3 Vanilla Commandramon. At 2 costs is really good, as a great way to seal off a turn and only give your opponent 1 or 2 memory. And at 3000 DP, sometimes whenever this guy swings, he doesn't die and actually lives to fight another day. So our last set of Commandramon cards for level 3s is going to be the EX3 Commandramon. This one basically has Decoy for any D-Brigade card out there. In some cases, your opponent might have more than one way to remove your important Digimon off the board, and in this case, you have another extra life basically for that Digimon, so it can stick around a little bit longer. And rounding out our level 3s, we're going to have 2 copies of the starter deck, Chikurimon. Now this deck has the potential to go super wide with some of the new cards, and because of that, Death Xmon is a problem. And so for that reason, we run this guy so your opponent cannot minus their play cost. This card also works well against Blue Flare, a deck that I would say is problematic as far as matchups go for D-Brigade, and so them being able to not reduce the cost of their Metal Greymons by Digicross is actually really important. So moving on to our level 4s, our first one is going to be 3 copies of the EX3 Sealstramon. This guy has jamming, which means he can run into opponent's security without worrying about those big Digimon that pop off the top. He's also one of your cards for what I call the perfect stack for this deck, with the inheritance effect of whenever you play a D-Brigade Digimon once per turn by an effect, you can give it Rush. Our next level 4 is going to be 4 copies of the BT14 High Commandramon, who has the nice little in-game rule that he counts as a Commandramon card, which means whenever that BT4 Commandramon would attack and is destroyed, if he comes up in one of the top 3 cards from that search, you can actually play the level 4 down. He also has that on-attack effect of looking at top 3 cards and playing a cost 3 D-Brigade or Digi-Police Digimon down for free without paying its cost. So again, he's another way you can keep your board really wide and healthy. And then he has the same effect as the BT14 Commandramon we talked about before, where whenever he would be removed from the board for whatever reason, you can actually destroy another D-Brigade card instead, and he's going to stay on the field. And our last level 4 for the deck is going to be 4 copies of the BT14 Numamon. Now this guy is a Digi-Police card and not a D-Brigade card. However, on play and on evolve, you can take a Satsuki Tamer that is also introduced in BT14 from your hand and put it up under this card as a source, and if you do, you can choose one of your Digimon on board and it gains Rush for the turn. This card is great at extending lethals. If you have this and the Sasuke Tamer in hand, then you can always guarantee yourself 1 more attack for the turn. whether it's digivolving over something that's level 3, in the case one of your Commandramons, into this guy, putting Satsuki up under him, then you can get something rush. Or if you have 3, remember, you can just hard play and get another body on board, and then give something rush as well. One thing I love to do is just collect one Numemon and one Satsuki Tamer and keep in hand for most of the game, so that even when my opponent's counting the lethal on board, they have to be wary of what's in my hand, because I can make one additional swing. Also, one last thing I forgot to mention, this guy has blocker on inheritance, and while that's not always super impactful, because it's easy to give most of the deck blocker, it will come up in a couple cases. Alright, so for our level 5s, I know I'm about to get crucified, but this deck only runs a total of 5 level 5 cards, and 4 of them are going to be the BT14 Cargo Dramon. Many of the other effects in this deck, on play or on evolve, this guy can look at top 4 cards and then grab a D-Brigade or Digi-Police card that has 4 cost or lower and play it on the board. Keep in mind that this allows you to also pull Tamers and play Tamers, so if you want to play the Satsuki Tamer with this, you can. Keep in mind this card does not allow you to play options, because there are now Digi-Police themed options, and because they don't have a technical play cost, they have what's called a use cost. This card's wording is very, very important. And then if you can Digivolve over this guy, his inheritance effect is bonkers. Once per turn on both turns, if one of your other Digimon is destroyed, look at top 3 cards and play a Commandramon from among them. Keep in mind that the cards that you don't choose are sent to the trash, which also is kind of useful for your missing mons we'll talk about later on. So this deck is really good at stacking your own deck and predicting your own future, but wouldn't it be nice to do that to your opponent as well? Well, that's where our last level 5 card for this deck comes in. It's going to be one copy of the BT14 Vadermon. On play or on evolve, you look at top 3 cards of your opponent's deck, and then you choose one of their Digimon. For every Digimon that you revealed off the top of their deck, that one Digimon gets De-Digivolved 1 level. The cool part here is you can take a look at those 3 cards and you can put them back either on the top or the bottom of your opponent's deck in any order, which means if they have really crappy next couple of draws that aren't useful, you can control their outcomes. For our level 6s of this deck, we're going to have just 3 copies of the BT14 Brigademon, aka Pew Pew Wargreymon. On Digivolve, he has mild removal, being able to destroy Digimon on your opponent's side of the board whose costs add up to 7, their play costs in this case. And then at the end of every turn, he's going to let you look at the top 3 cards of your deck and play Digimon whose total costs add up to 7, who are D-Brigade or Digi-Police typed. The best case scenario for this, I think, is 2 of the 2 cost Commandramon. That way you get 2 bodies down, and that's only 4, and then you can play a level 3 card, whether it being a Numemon or another Commandramon card, so you get a full 3 down. You're typically going to get 2 more cards off of this, typically like 2 Commandramon or like a high Commandramon and then like a 3 cost like Numemon or something like that. This is just a great check card because it sets up a wall of blockers that your opponent has to get through, and if they don't get through it, then all of that defense becomes offense the following turn where you can just attack your opponent's security. Believe it or not, this deck does run a couple of level 7s, and this one runs specifically 2 copies of Death Xmon. Now, why 2 copies of Death Xmon? Well, in BT14's meta specifically, decks tend to go very wide. There's a hard potential for decks to get like 3 to 4 Digimon out before they kill you. And although this card is not a D-Brigade or Digi-Police type Digimon, which means you can't like search for him through traditional means, you can use the Commandramon's effect to stack your deck so that you draw into this guy when you need him. Another potential option for the level 7s is Quartzmon, which is a card that I didn't really care for whenever I tried it out. It never really came up and was that useful. And so for this reason, I chose Death Xmon over him because he's just more useful in a lot more situations. Then moving on to our options, our first one is going to be 3 copies of the Promo Defense Training. This is a generic, really good search card, allowing you to pull not only Digimon, but also options or Tamers in this case. So if you have a Numemon in hand, you can always just pull a Satsuki Tamer for that extra attack later on in the game. And because the Defense Training allows you to Digivolve and cost -2 from the Digivolution cost, that means that Numemon later on could be free. Our next option is going to be 3 copies of another good generic search card in the Black Memory Boost. Now you're probably wondering, why are you using Black Memory Boost over something like Pride Memory Boost? Well, I tried Pride Memory Boost out in the very beginning, and one thing that I ran into, and now that I'm very wary of, is Death Xmon. Being able to put more Digimon on board is not always a good thing. And with the Black Memory Boost, I can also just grab anything I want. In cases where Pride Memory Boost would have milled the Brigademon or the Cargodramon, with Black Memory Boost, I can get those cards in hand and then use the effect from the delay to later on make the Digivolve cost a little bit easier to manage. So this deck runs quite a few options, and this next one is probably going to be one of the most invaluable ones for the deck, and that is 3 copies of BT14's DCD Bomb. For a meager 4 memory, you can De-Digivolve one of your opponent's Digimon 1 stage, and it has a similar effect to the Digi-Egg Missimon, where if you take 3 D-Brigade or Digi-Police cards from your trash and stack them in any order on the top of your deck, you can destroy Digimon on your opponent's side of the board whose total cost adds up to 6 or less. Our last set of options for this deck are going to be the most recently added one, that is 2 copies of BT9's Kongo. Before this slot was occupied by copies of Ultimate Flare, being able to Digivolve 3 stages and then wipe all level 3s on your opponent's side of the board, but honestly that's not super useful unless you're fighting in the mirror. Most of the decks out there are actually dropping level 4s, which means they're all immune to the Ultimate Flare's final destruction effect. And then it got me thinking, you know, minus the De-Digivolve effect, Kongo kind of does what I want it to the most, and that is, it stops everything that is cost 7 or lower from attacking, which means even if my opponent was playing the mirror, or they had a bunch of level 4s in the case of Finner and Lugumon, they couldn't make an attack unless they Digivolve those to a level 5 or level 6. Kongo also has that nice bonus effect when you're fighting against yellow and preventing your opponent's effects from increasing either player's security, which means players that try to go super hard on the Patamon vaccine stuff actually end up getting punished and losing security as a result. This is a bit of extra info here. Other options that I played around with instead of that Kongo for that slot were things like Digi Dimension, being able to Digivolve everything one stage and then wipe out some cost 6. Another one was Iron Fisted Onslaught. This deck is pretty weak to, you know, high level Digimon that don't have any sources because they can't be De-Digivolved, and so things like Royal Knights or, you know, just another Death Xmon could be really problematic. I've since solved that problem by adding in the Chikurimon, but if you want to go that route, Iron Fisted Onslaught might be a way to deal with those threats as well. And for our Tamers, we're only going to run one kind of Tamer in this deck. It's going to be 4 copies of the Tamihime Satsuki card introduced in BT14. She has that nice beginning of turn effect that if your opponent has the Digimon on board, you just get +1 memory, but more importantly, she has the ability to Mind Link over the course of a turn, and if she Mind Links, the Digimon that she Mind Links with gets Reboot and Jamming, which means you can attack with your Digimon without having to worry about them being destroyed in the case of your high Commandramon to multiply your boards very quickly, and then at the start of your opponent's turn, you're going to get that Reboot to save the Digimon so your opponent can't attack into it. Also, one of the cool things about the Mind Link cards is that all of them right now have the effect that at the end of either turn, you can choose to basically unmind link this Tamer from the Digimon, which means you can, on your turns, keep the jamming and the reboot, and then at the end of your opponent's turn, you can unmind link and then get the +1 at the start of your main phase. Also, just realized I forgot this, but here's a full image of the deck list. So now let's talk a little bit about strategy. And the first thing I want to talk about is your mulligan. So when I'm thinking about my mulligan, in most matchups, I want to find my top end cards pretty quickly, or cards that can get to those top end cards as fast as possible. Honestly speaking, an opening hand like this, like the BT4 Commandramon, the High Commandramon, a search card like Black Memory Boost, or in this case, Defense Training also works, and then Brigadramon and or a Cargodramon is perfect. Now, turn 1, I'm going to drop my Commandramon down here in Raising. The following turn, I'm going to bring him out so I can start to widen my board while also playing down the Black Memory Boost or the Defense Training. And then the following turn after that, I'm going to start raising my big Digimon, like the Brigadramon, over here and raising once again. In some matchups, you can just go super fast, and if you wanted to get a bunch of Commandramon, you can do that. But in some other matchups, with things against like Finner and Lugumon, you're going to have to kind of play the long game. Even though that short game and that fast, aggressive game is going to seem really enticing, you can lose by checking your opponent's security and giving them resources. So keep that in mind as well. So outside of your tech cards, the cards in this deck are going to occupy one of 3 main roles. The first role is going to be what I call the perfect stack, being able to assemble something like a BT14 Commandramon for some search, into the Sealsdramon for some jamming, and then going into Cargodramon to widen your board, and then you also get the Brigadramon here to also go super wide, pop something, and then make this the check from your opponent's side. The reason that I call this the perfect stack is because it gives you everything you want in one Digimon. In this case, it gives you your Digimon protection from the Commandramon, being able to remove another D-Brigade card off the board in order for it not to be removed. And then whenever you would use this effect for one of your other Digimon, the Cargodramon's effect kicks in, and you can look at top 3 cards and play a Commandramon from among them. And once you play that card down, the Sealsdramon can give that Digimon rush immediately. On top of all that, when it's your opponent's turn and this effect triggers, you're going to be able to get another blocker on board immediately from the Brigadramon's effect here as well. And then at the end of every one of your turns, you're going to refresh your board so that you always have something to destroy instead of the Brigadramon getting hit. Another role that cards in this deck can fit is going to be that of tempo and aggression, that being mostly the cards of the BT4 Commandramon and the BT14 High Commandramon. Both these cards allow you to attack opponent's security, keeping the aggression as well as keeping the board healthy at the same time, so keeping that tempo as well. I'm going to warn you right now that you're going to be tempted in many cases to only go for this game plan right here and ignore getting to the Brigadramon because your offense in the beginning of the game looks really good. That is a really big trap. Don't fall for it. While in some cases this is a good game plan to just be super aggressive right from the get-go, in many cases you want to make sure that you have an out to get to that Brigadramon whenever you might need it. Because in BT14 there is quite a bit of removal for some of the stronger decks out there, and you can have your entire board of Commandramon evaporated in a single turn. And the last role that I think cards occupy for this deck is that of extending lethal, or extending the way you can close out games. And that is through the cards like the Numamon, the Satsuki Tamer, as well as the search cards in Black Memory Boost and the Defense Training. Both these search cards essentially give you 2 extra memory, and so you can use that whether you're going to Digivolve into or hard play your Numamon to slot the Satsuki in underneath it as its effect, and then give single on the board rush for that 1 extra attack to close the game out. So let's talk a little bit about matchups. I'm not going to talk about every single matchup, otherwise we'd be here all day, and the ad revenue would be crazy from this video, but I'm not that greedy, so sorry. But I'm going to talk about some of the most prevalent matchups you're probably going to come across in this meta. The first one's going to be War Greymon here. War Greymon's not super scary, but is a little bit tricky. Raid isn't really an ability that you have to worry about once you get your Brigade Dramon up, because you have so many blockers that they usually just can't get through everything, and they typically invest in like one heavy blocker. What you do need to worry about though are things like the level 5 Metal Greymon that De-Digivolves. If you have a Brigade Dramon out and they get to the level 5 Metal Greymon and De-Digivolve it, you're gonna have to scramble to find another Brigade Dramon to Digivolve back on top of that. And then also, you lose blocker for everything, so in some cases you can just lose the game because everything loses blocker at the same time. Because most War Greymon decks right now are pretty defensive oriented, going for the Black War Greymon and the Black War Greymon X Antibody, one thing you can do is wait till they get to level 6 and then just DCD bomb them. This way you don't have to worry about the Black War Greymon X Antibody soaking up 2 attacks per turn. The next deck I want to talk about is going to be Shine Greymon, and honestly this is a really uphill match for D-Brigade. And that's because DP- is a really powerful effect, and this deck doesn't really have a way to stop that. Some of the more useful cards in this matchup are going to be the tech cards, things like Kongo, as well as your Death Xmon, because Kongo can stop your opponent's Tamers from attacking, which means they can't get free Digivolves. Additionally, it prevents them from slotting the Tamers into your opponent's security by trying to recover those using the Rise Greymon X effects. And then Death Xmon punishes them if they do try to go super wide with a bunch of Tamers and then don't really check their own board. So plants, things like Bloom Quartz and Rosemon, stuff like that, because they typically can go super wide, you guys are kind of always competing for tempo at the same time. The thing you have to be worried about is getting your stuff rested and then attacked into. That could be really problematic. Another good card is going to be DCD Bomb, being able to get rid of things like the Bloom Lords, the Hydramons, or the Quartzmons, because those can be really problematic when they get up. And then finally, make sure that you have a Command Dramon from BT14 or the High Command Dramon from BT14 in your sources. That way, if your Digimon will get rested and then attacked into, you have some way to protect them using those protection effects. Next up is going to be Royal Knight. All I can say here is aggression, aggression, aggression. Out the gate, make sure you get those Command Dramons and High Command Dramons that can replace themselves, and make sure you multiply the board as wide as possible, as fast as possible. You don't want them to sit down and stall you out for 6 turns, and then kill you with an Omnimon. Your tech card Chikurimon is going to be really useful in this matchup if you can find him, because it's going to force your opponent to pay the full amount for those Royal Knights Digimon they're going to be playing, because they can get the costs reduced off of the Yugioh effect. And then if they end up paying one of those really high costs, it's going to give you enough memory to basically close the game out in 2 turns. So Blue Flare, I can sum up this matchup in basically one sentence, and that is all aboard the struggle bus. D-Brigade wants to go wide, Blue Flare also wants D-Brigade to go wide, and you just fall into the trap naturally with your own game plan. The combination of Metal Greymon and Soulrai basically freezes your board every single turn, and so it's really hard to get anything through here. Useful cards in this matchup are going to be things like Kongo, which are going to stall your opponent from attacking because the Metal Greymons typically have, I think, 7 play costs, which means they can't attack. The player anyway. Additionally, the Chikurimon are going to be really useful because your opponent can't Digicross to reduce costs to 3. And then finally, my hope is that you can get a Death Xmon down because you've stalled your opponent out so long using things like the Chikurimon as well as the Kongo. Even then, a win isn't guaranteed, and so if you do end up winning this match, count your stars because that was a very, very lucky game you just had. So fighting against Fenrir-Lugomon, you have to be really cautious in your approach, because if you end up going really aggressive in the beginning of the game and you end up checking security that basically gives your opponent resources, things like Missed Memory Boost or Analog Youth or like a Wisdom Training card or something like that, then you can unexpectedly die the following turn. For this reason, what I like to do is to build up my resources on board while they're building up things like the Missed Memory Boosts and the training cards, just to get value in that one big burst turn. And once I can see the lines of my Brigade Dramon, then I start to make my offensive move. Also, once you get your Brigade Dramon down, you want to make sure that it has some form of protection, whether it is the decoy cards or the inheritance effects from the High Command Dramon or the BT14 Command Dramon. In most cases, your blocker should be enough to stop your opponent from sealing the game, but not getting that Brigade Dramon up by the time they get to Fenrir-Lugomon is detrimental. And so I said it before, but I'll say it again, especially because it feels most pertinent in this matchup, and that is do not fall into the trap of going hyper-aggressive in the early game. Again, if you check any amount of resources for your opponent, you basically die the next turn. And so the last deck I want to talk about is going to be Mirage Galgamon. Now, I approach this matchup similarly to how I approach Fenrir-Lugomon, but it's a little bit harder because if the Mirage Galgamon player does pull the Digimon out from raising, you have to be a little bit worried because of their removal effects. Things like the Galgamon that can remove a level 3, as well as the Maha Galgamon that can remove a level 4, and then beyond that we have things like the Mirage Galgamon itself, which removes level 5, and then the Burst Mode, which can remove basically anything. And so my early game here looks really similar to Fenrir-Lugomon, and that is I built up a wider board in the beginning of the game, find my line to Brigade Dramon, and then close out. And so I think it's finally time to bring this deck profile to a close. In summary, D-Brigade is a deck that is really strong and become really strong in BT14, holding on to its very aggressive roots. However, it feels very rewarding, and you'll find much more reward in this deck whenever you can predict your next couple of draws or effects or turns, and being able to stack cards from the Missimon effect, the DCD Bomb, or the Command Dramon Search effect. By correctly managing the next couple of cards off the top of your deck, this deck creates offense that a lot of decks cannot keep up with. I know I covered a lot in this video, and if there are any questions you have about things that I didn't cover or stuff you want my opinion on about the deck, please let me know in the comments below. Anyway, folks, I'm gonna get out of here. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.